Welcome everyone to today's episode of Goals and Game Changers. We're here to explore key insights on business transformation, leadership, and product innovation. My name is Stacey Louie, and I'm your host and the CEO of Hyperdrive. So Sinead Condon is the Chief People Officer at Guidewire Software, where she leads global people strategy. Here, she's responsible for making sure this company has the best talent on the planet working for their organization. She's got a background in organizational transformation and agile methodologies, but mostly she's passionate about building high-performing teams and ecosystems where employees work with purpose and can make a profound impact. Sinead is here with us today to talk about leadership and the human side of change, emphasizing the importance of storytelling, ownership, decision-making, and listening to learn in driving successful business cultural evolution. So let's get started. We're so delighted to have Sinead here. Sinead, great to have you.
Great to be here. Yes, you and this is going to be a fun conversation. You and I have navigated lots of different things together, so I'm looking forward to chatting with you.
Likewise. Now, I don't want to take the surprise or anything, but you've had a great Silicon Valley history. You've done some amazing things out here. Could you just take a minute to introduce yourself and a little bit about your background?
Sure. I'm sure the Irish brogue gives it away. I'm originally from Ireland, born and bred. Came to the States back in 1998. I was hired by an Irish guy into an SAP consulting firm. And I had been doing really well in Ireland. I was managing some SAP projects over there and really got the bug to come to the US and continue my SAP career over here. So came over, had a number of projects under my belt, integrated into Siebel projects, and then stepped into the Agile world, which may come up in our chat today. And then kind of fast forward to my career now, and who would have thunk that I would wind up as the Chief People Officer, historically known, I think, as the head of HR. But I think one of the reasons that I leaned into it is because it too has gone through transformation and evolution. And I'm very much part of the senior executive team that runs the company. And my lens on people and great talent is something I'm very privileged to do every day. I live in Silicon Valley. I have a dog. I have 2 kids that are gone off to college, so I'm an empty nester, and life's good.
That's terrific. And on top of that, you spend your time being a startup advisor.
I do. When you've got this many scars. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, I mean, look, it's been an interesting ride. I've learned a lot. I continue to learn a lot. And I believe very much in sharing the love. So we've got to support each other and build communities where we can. And if we can give back in that way, I think that's great.
That's great. Now, Sinead, you've had this history of transformation and like transforming organizations. I've seen you help transform executives. And kind of talking through what the world of business is happening today. There's this growth of business transformation across the globe, how we're actually changing everything from our operating models to the ways we work to the mindsets. In your past and the things that you've worked on, what sort of transformations have you been involved with, and specifically, which one would you take away as like the biggest challenge for you?
Yeah, look, I would say, I think it's an interesting question, and it's definitely worth reflection. I don't know if I would necessarily say one was the biggest challenge. I think they all have their challenges in different ways. And, I used to go in and sometimes still do say, you've seen everything until you haven't, right? And whether it's, I used to think, I will tell you just to kind of reflect back, I used to think that the greatest challenges for me as a tech leader, if you will, or as a people leader, either one, you wear both hats, was the technology piece, right? You're doing these complex integrations, you're pulling stuff out, you're re-engineering both the technology and process, and that's complicated and complex, and there can be chaos involved. But in the reality of it, I think what I've learned along the way is that the most complexity happens when you really dial into what's happening on the people there, because that really and truly is where the most complexity comes from. And when we think back, I think any of us, including your listeners, you think about the challenges that you have in work. And sure, we can check off a whole bunch of boxes on, the things that come up on the tech side. But really, when you do reflect, many of those challenges are, we've blockers on decision making. Why? Because you have lots of different characters, right? The team's not quite gelled. Or any number of people related things that, and oftentimes we don't put it down to the people, we put it down to everything else. Sometimes because we just, we're so embedded in everything that's going on, we can't see the leaves from the trees. And so I think for me, it has always been really on the people side. I recognized that with a thud probably about 15 years ago when I was on a project, and actually it's probably more than that, maybe 20 years ago. I'm showing my age, but I was managing an SAP project, and we were actually coming towards the end, and I was walking past a lady who was sitting in her cube that was crying. And
Oh
I
my
was
gosh.
walking with the CEO, I'll never forget it. And I kind of did a double take. I could hear her crying, and I walked in, and she looked at me, and with compassion, I said, "Are you okay?" And she looked me in the eye and she said, "You're taking my job away today. I just got
Mm,
let go." And I swear to God, Stacey, it hit me like a ton of bricks, because sure, did I have it as a line item for change management? Yeah.
mm,
But did I really consider the impact? And not to say in reality, hand on heart, that it might have changed the outcome of her maybe being displaced, which is awful. But the way in which it was done could have been so much better had I had the wherewithal to really put the people side with the weightiness that it needed in that moment.
that's right. Yeah, it's funny in managing these transformations. I mean, we often think about what's on the checklist, and we often
Yeah,
think about the mechanics and not necessarily the people and lives that we touch.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And there will be different times to put different weight on things, but you do have to look at these things holistically, because it's not one thing that's going to get you over the finish line. There's not one silver bullet. And as much as we can all look in the mirror and say, what's the silver bullet on it? And but that's where intuition comes into play, and you have to look at your environment and do a lot of sense making.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Now, kind of looking back, comparing where you were back then
Mhm.
and what you were doing, and clearly you had focus. You're working with CEO, you're making this big change happen with SAP, which is a just incredible amount of work and the pressure that I'm sure that you're under.
Mhm.
How do you reconcile that? Maybe knowing what you know now, how would you coach yourself back then? Like, what would you tell yourself as you went into that transformation? Knowing what you've developed, skills that you've developed over these most recent years.
Yeah, and it's going, when I say it, it's going to sound really, really obvious, but it just shows you how clueless I probably was back then. Um, we go into technology projects, I think we're all so busy thinking about the outcomes that the technology will bring. And even today, when we talk about AI and automation, we're all in hustle mode to just optimize, all the right things to be doing. But back then, we were so focused on the end game of getting SAP in and getting it up and running and really shifting the entire backdrop of how that company operated, that I didn't think to ask some obvious questions. Sure, do we talk about process and reengineering? Yeah. But I didn't lean in hard enough to asking the people related questions, you know,
Hmm.
um, as we optimize in one area, what, um, what do we compromise on the other side, right? If we do, as we, get success with this particular outcome, what's the impact, the human impact of us doing that? What are the gives and takes, right, on that? And what will hinder us and what will help us, right? Because sometimes we're so busy in optimization mode and becoming strong operators that we forget the most fundamental thing is what is the foundational environment with the people around us, in order for us to drive and execute on what we're doing. And maybe it's because I'm so attuned to that, and I have to be careful because you don't want to over-index on it, right? And that's, I think, the balance when I think back is the over, you say, what would I do differently? I think it was balance that I missed. I
Mhm.
over-indexed on the tech, but I also have to be careful as the chief people officer that I don't over-index on the people side, right? There has to be this tension there that I'm intuitive enough to recognize where the pressure points are for both.
Yeah, the attention is such a good word, Sinead, because even looking at where the world's at today, I'm seeing the tension growing. I mean, there's this sense of, hey, this is where we're at with the economy. Economy's doing some strange things over the last couple of years. They've been doing some strange things for us. It's been hard for a lot of companies, a lot of folks. Um, and then we see this new injection of technology of AI and how that's shifting things, and the projection of where executive staff and executives are starting to see where the future is going to go, how they manage their capacity, where they invest. And so between rounds of investment on AI and rounds of reductions in force on the other side, trying to calibrate that. And I'm sure every technology company is going through something similar. And not only that, I'm sure that other companies are going through the same thing, whether they're in tech or not in tech. Are you seeing things like that kind of float around, challenging managers and executives to make some of the tougher decisions in business?
Of course. I think the answer is of course. And I think every company is going through transition. And if they're not, they become irrelevant very quickly, right? And so I think, somebody asked me a question the other day, how do I see leadership shaping up in the next 5 to 10 years? And it's less about what does leadership look like. It's more about what will our environment look like, and what are we literally shaping our work to be, that we back into leadership on, right? And so when we think about, I'll give you an example, and AI is a good one. Um, if we think about AI and what AI is helping us to optimize on, what it's shaping our future to be, I think we have to get really good, as an example, very tactically, on storytelling, right? As leaders, it is so deprioritized in terms of a skill, but that storytelling part of being able to stand up there and articulate with the gravitas and education that's needed to say, what is the future of our company? What does that growth look like? How do we see us jumping onto AI? How do we see it optimizing what it is that we do today? And what is the impact that's going to have on us? That is a thread that has to be pulled in such a way that it helps people to ground themselves, to get purposeful and intentional about what the future looks like, because there is an individual and collective piece to that. The individual might be the employee, it might be the leader, it might be the entity that is the company, and then there is the collective piece, which is the community. How do we band together, and what does that all look like? And so that storytelling piece, which is really about the framing and the way in which we talk about it, is so important right now. It is so important because people are looking for clarity. Am I going to lose my job? Right? People hear AI, it's becoming a bit of a trigger. And so you don't want that. You don't want to stifle the innovation of that, but you want to ground people so that they can go on the journey with you.
Yeah, it's I mean, that would be a great skill to have as being a manager or being a leader in your company, being able to articulate the story and offer direction. Um, it sounds a lot like Simon Sinek when he talks about the why, right?
100%.
It's core, right?
It
It's
is
people.
core. In fact, we're getting ready to do a summit here, um, and at the end of March. And one of the, we were talking amongst the management team, what would be one of the core skills that we want to make sure that everybody has. And storytelling was one of the top core skills that we want people to understand. Not because I mean, in Ireland, we talk about the Shanachie, the storytellers of Ireland, and everybody has the gift of the gab. We're not talking about that. We're talking about clarity around purpose and outcome, right? And making sure people understand how to articulate the why. Like if you can't do that as a leader, like, your days are numbered. Like it's just fundamental to being able to be a leader in the 21st century.
That's fantastic. Yeah, it seems like a key skill of any kind of transformation or any kind of growth going into leadership to be able to explain the why. Because I think if senior level executives are great at explaining the why, then it cascades down and everybody
That's
takes
right.
ownership of that. And then they can integrate it into their day-to-day work. Why am I actually doing this work? It's because I'm here for the greater good. It might be something where I'm here because I'm working for this particular consumer or this customer base. Um, and it's very product minded instead of like a project minded kind of a approach, isn't it?
It is, and it's so funny, we talk about ownership because ultimately, any one of us, coming into work every day, which we hope has purpose, that you feel a sense of ownership. And a couple of weeks ago, we were doing a talk on the use of language in leadership and how ownership and owning something can have just a different meaning to different people. It's highly subjective. And we were talking about the difference between what it means to own something in work versus if you own something outside of work, like your house or your car or your bike, and the feeling of that ownership and how it manifests in what you do and how you own it at home can often feel very, very different, right? And so how do you get that true sense of ownership in a work environment? But of course, you need to have the autonomy and you need to have the skills and you need to have all of these things that create that for you. But it was a very interesting exercise to talk about the difference of what that looks and feels like when you are outside of work versus inside of work and how that relationship feels, right?
Yeah, that's right. And back in the day when I was in packaged goods, I used to be a product manager. And my first product I ever managed was raisins, of all things, raisins. And it sounds so minute and it just sounds so silly, those little raisins. But there's nothing more special than seeing your package of raisins sitting there on the grocery store shelf. It's like I
Uh-huh.
did that. I was
That's
able to,
right.
yeah, and you have that ownership and you feel
That's
like,
right.
and you'll
Yeah.
do anything for those raisins.
Yes. And that feeling, that sense of pride, how do we as leaders recreate that sense of pride? Because that's so associated with ownership. Yet so many people own things in the workplace that don't have that. Why is that? Right?
You mentioned decision making. Do you think decision making has a lot to do with that, or you think that's like, because I see some of the things that teams get involved with, and sometimes teams look they look frustrated. They look
Yeah.
frustrated because they're not in a position to make a decision on one thing or another, and it feels like it takes things away and that management scheme.
It does. There's a great book. So I hope your listeners can write this down or Google it on Amazon. It's a book by a guy called Kimball Fisher. I want to say it's Self-Directed Work Teams, Stacey. I don't know if you know that book, but
Hmm.
there's a chapter in the book where Kimball Fisher talks about empowerment, and he uses this acronym ARIA, ARIA. And in that, he breaks down that for someone to feel a sense of ownership, they need to have accountability, resources, information, and authority. And so much, if we think about every single person that's listening to this podcast about what they feel they're empowered, bit of a dirty word, right? Empowered, what does it even mean? Um, but like often we're anointed with, you are accountable for this project, but yet you feel you have no authority to make the decisions. Or you're not, you're the last to hear about some very key information in the decision making because you didn't have a seat at the table over there that was talking about a certain thing. Like there's a recipe to that, to get that sense of ownership. It's just a great chapter. Kimball Fisher, highly recommend it.
Pinball Fisher. Okay, I'll definitely look that up. Well, here you mentioned empowerment. Is this might be a little controversial, maybe not. Is empowerment a management thing or is it a personal thing? That is empowerment something that management has to do or something a person has to take on?
I think that's a great question, and quite honestly, maybe a little bit of both. I heard somebody in work say the other day, we were talking about leadership, and they said, um, "Do you wait for influence or do you lead with influence?"
Hmm.
And I freaking loved that. I thought because so much of what we do is waiting to have the influence to make the decision versus kind of leaning into it and saying, here's my, my intent is to do this. Here is what I believe we should do, or whatever. That's leading with influence, right? And you come out the other end of that, people are going, yeah, you go, girl, right? Or whatever.
Yeah.
And so I do think so much of it is on our own desire and curiosity to know how to create that for ourselves. But in reality, you have to be surrounded by people in your orbit that create the space for you to do that, right?
Hmm.
So I do think both need to be at the table in order for that to happen.
Yeah, yeah. It really captures the essence of your intention as a worker, whether you're a worker at the executive level or a management level or maybe you're an individual contributor. What is your stated intention? Like, why do you want to be at work? It goes back to looking at the organization, thinking, "Gosh, organization, you're going to transform, right?" But
Right.
maybe there's a lot of it in ourselves. What are we doing to help create that transformation?
Absolutely. And I think some of the questions that we have to ask, I mean, if I am a manager and I'm talking to somebody that I have this, let's say, assumption or expectation that they own something, I mean, some of the question without leading the witness has to be, hey, Stacey, what do you feel you have control over?
Yeah.
Stacey, what is it, what's it going to look like for you when this has reached the outcome and we're successful? What does that look like? And those types of open-ended questions, I think, very much put some color around how much authority and empowerment that person actually has, right?
Excellent. Well, we're coming to the end of our podcast today, but I'd like to take just a moment to kind of do a post-game review on some of the transformations you've seen and some of the work you've done. Um, as far as the key takeaways of things that really materially made a difference in the years that you've been doing this, and you mentioned some great things, storytelling. We talked about intention. We talked about having that ownership, decision making, all these great things. Is there one thing that kind of sticks out at you that says, "Hey, if there's one thing I could share with the audience, what would that be?"
I think one of the things that I've learned, Stacey, is that, and maybe this is controversial, but oftentimes when you are leading transformation, I'll talk about I for a second, when I've been leading transformation and you feel like you come out of a meeting and you're banging your head against a brick wall and you're like, why do they not know that this is a good idea? And, why are they not interested in the outcomes that I'm talking about? And I've realized a lot of the time what's showing up is a fear of the unknown and a lack of education because I have not done a good job clarifying what it is that we're actually trying to drive and the impact and value realization of what's
Mm,
to come. And I have a lot more empathy and compassion now for people not necessarily jumping on the boat right off the bat.
mhm.
I think that's one thing. So gaining some empathy around where people are coming from. And yes, we say it's almost cliche, meet people where they are, but like really do, like it's so easy to say. And the other thing is build relationships. My whole career has been based on having true relationships with people because it is at the end of the day, it's all about trust, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. You got to be able to trust your peers, your bosses, the people around you.
Yeah.
Um,
And the
that's
decision making that's been made, right?
that's right. I mean, I love assuming that people are making their decisions based off of the best intent possible, right?
Mhm.
And it really creates a very wholesome relationship.
Yeah.
And
Can I say one thing?
yes.
Are you listening to learn? Are you listening to understand? Or are you listening to win? And I think many of us can be around a table and know who the people are that are both listening to win and listening to learn and understand. Be a listener who's looking to learn and understand first and foremost.
Oh, that's fantastic, Sinead. That's what a great way to wrap things up today. Before I let you go, um, we have this player of the week part of our program. We're thinking about, well, what organization or person that you've seen in the world that's kind of aligning towards the things that you would say this is an ideal person on change or ideal situation. Um, can you think of like a player of the week, something that you see changing the world, or someone you see changing the world that's just been stellar, really exhibiting some great characteristics?
Well, it's a person from my past who was a mentor for me. Can I use that?
Absolutely.
And his ears would be burning. I had a leader in a company that I worked for very, very early on my career. His name was Sean Corkery. He's still a leader today, Sean. And he taught me what leadership is and what leadership is not. And he's one of the most just profound characters that I've met who treats everybody with respect, regardless of it doesn't do hierarchy. And he's a guy that knows how to listen to learn. Yeah,
Listen
Sean
to learn.
Corkery.
I think that's today's lesson is listen to learn. I think that's a great highlight, Sinead.
Well, thank you. That went by fast. It was so fun to talk to you.
It's great. Thank you for coming out and talking with us on goals and game changers.
Thank you.
As we wrap up today's conversation, let's reflect on some of the key takeaways from Sinead's insights. First, people are truly the complexity in a transformation. And while technology and process change are challenging, the deepest complexities arise from the human side, the emotions, decision-making dynamics, team cohesion, and empathy. The second point she makes is modern leadership requires storytelling and balance. Leaders must come as skilled storytellers to help articulate the purpose, direction, and impact that their work is having to the organization. The third thing is empowerment stems from both systems and the self, meaning Sinead emphasizes the importance of leading with influence and listening to learn, not to win. Cultivating trust and clarity are the foundation for organizational change. We hope that today's conversation has inspired you to rethink how your organization approaches transformation and leadership. If you're interested in taking the next step in business transformation, please feel free to reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you and help you apply these key insights to your own teams. Keep following us on social media at hyperdriveagile.com. Thank you for joining us today on Goals and Game Changers. Stay curious, stay customer focused, and we'll see you next time.